My parents replaced me with their miracle child. Now she's run away at 13, and they're desperate for my help after years of lies. Growing up, I always felt like I wasn't quite what my parents had hoped for. They had spent years trying for a daughter, convinced that their family wouldn't be complete without one. But instead of the little girl they had dreamed about, they got me. And they never really tried to hide their disappointment. I remember overhearing them once, saying I was just a spare. Another time, they actually referred to me as a remnant. As a kid, I didn't fully grasp what that meant, but as I got older, the weight of it sank in. It became painfully clear I wasn't the child they had been hoping for. I was just the one they ended up with while waiting for the real thing. They never stopped trying for another baby, either. It was all they talked about, whether at family gatherings or when friends came over. I remember people telling them they should be grateful to have at least one child, but my parents always brushed that off. As far as they were concerned, if it wasn't a girl, it didn't really count. Then, when I was 15, they finally got what they wanted. My sister was born. And to them, she wasn't just another child. She was their miracle, their perfect little girl, the one they had been waiting for all along. The moment she arrived, everything changed. Every ounce of their love, attention, and money went straight to her. Not that I ever really felt like much of a priority before, but after she was born, I might as well have been invisible. They stopped pretending to care about my interests, and anything that involved me was handled in the easiest, most convenient way possible so they could focus on her. Meanwhile, every little thing my sister did was showered with praise. It didn't take long for me to realize where I stood. And honestly, what could I do? I accepted it. I didn't have much of a choice. By the time I turned 18, it became pretty obvious that my parents were ready for me to be out of the picture entirely. On my birthday, they sat me down not to celebrate, but to tell me it was time for me to move out. According to them, they needed more space in the house, and with me there, I was taking up resources that were better spent on my sister. I tried to explain that I wasn't ready yet, that I just needed a few more months to save up and find a place, but they didn't care. They said I'd had enough time to prepare and that I should be able to handle things on my own by now. And just like that, I was out. I didn't have much, just a couple of bags of clothes and whatever cash I had saved from working odd jobs in high school. For a while, I crashed on friends' couches before I finally managed to scrape together enough to rent a tiny, rundown apartment. Those first few years were rough. I took whatever work I could find, night shifts at convenience stores, backbreaking labor on construction sites, just trying to get by. Nothing was stable. I spent most of my time worrying about rent, about food. There were nights I went to bed hungry, wondering if I'd even have enough to eat the next day. And through all of it, I kept trying to stay in touch with my parents. I don't even know why. I should have been angry, but they were still my parents. A part of me wanted to believe they cared, even just a little. Every once in a while, I'd call, hoping to hear something, anything, that made me feel like I mattered to them. But every conversation was the same. Short. Awkward. Like they were just waiting for it to be over. The only reason we ever spoke was because I was the one reaching out. They never called to check in, never asked if I was okay. And after 2 years of that, I finally gave up. It hurt too much to keep trying. So I stopped calling. And sure enough, once I did, that was it. They never reached out. No holiday messages. No birthday calls. Nothing. At some point, I just had to accept it. They had their perfect little family now, and I wasn't part of it. Yeah, it stung. But I made my peace with it. 9 years went by like that. In that time, I built a life for myself. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I had a steady job, a small but comfortable place, and friends who had become my real family. I had finally put the past behind me. Then, a few days ago, out of nowhere, my parents called. At first, I thought something serious had happened. I hadn't heard their voices in nearly 7 years, so I picked up. But right away, I could tell they weren't calling just to reconnect. They sounded frantic. Desperate, even. They told me it was about my sister. According to them, she was completely out of control. I was confused. She was only 12 or 13. How bad could things really be? But they went on, explaining how she was skipping school, getting into fights, and already mixed up in some serious trouble. Apparently, she'd started experimenting with substances, hanging out with the wrong crowd, making reckless choices. They had already spent a fortune trying to fix things, different programs, counseling sessions, but nothing had worked. I was stunned. I mean, I know teenagers can be difficult, but this was something else. It sounded like all those years of spoiling her had finally caught up with them. And now, they didn't know what to do. Then they got to the real reason they called. They wanted me to help. They expected me to step in, to support them emotionally and financially. They said they were exhausted, drained, and couldn't handle it anymore. They actually thought I would drop everything, forget the years of neglect, the rejection, the way they cast me aside, and somehow swoop in to fix everything. And then, just to top it all off, they tried to guilt-trip me. Said I was still their son. That family is supposed to be there for each other in hard times. Hearing what had happened to my sister was shocking, but what really set me off was the way my parents weren't even asking for my help, they were demanding it. Where was all this family sticks together talk when I was 18 and begging them to let me stay? Where was their concern when I was crashing on friends' couches, barely scraping by? They had thrown me out without a second thought. Now, just because things had fallen apart for them, they expected me to drop everything and come to their rescue? I told them no. I said I'd built a life for myself without their help, and I didn't see why I should put myself in a difficult position now just because they had raised my sister without boundaries. That was their doing, not mine. They did not take it well. Suddenly, I was the selfish one. I was ungrateful. They said I was abandoning them in their time of need, like they hadn't abandoned me first. They accused me of holding a grudge, of being petty, and said that no matter what had happened in the past, I should still help because, at the end of the day, they were my family. I let them go on for a while, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. So, I hung up. I knew I'd made the right call, but in the days that followed, they wouldn't leave me alone. My mom texted me, asking if I'd be willing to meet for dinner over the weekend just to hear them out. And now, I don't know. Logically, I don't owe them a damn thing. Not after the way they treated me. But there's this little voice in the back of my head that won't shut up, telling me maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should be the bigger person, set everything aside, and help them despite everything. I keep going back and forth. One part of me says they made their bed, and now they have to lie in it. But another part wonders, will I regret this later? Will I look back someday and feel guilty for turning my back when they were desperate? Update 1. Hey everyone, I wanted to give an update since things have moved forward. Also, I saw a lot of questions in the comments, so I'll try to clear some things up before getting into what happened next. A lot of people asked why I don't just cut my sister off too, and if I blame her for any of this. The answer is no, I don't hold anything against her. I don't know her at all, really. She was a baby when I left, and I haven't been around since. To me, she's just a kid I never got the chance to know. Any anger or resentment I feel is not directed at her. It's at my parents, for how they treated me, for making me feel like I never mattered, and now, for expecting me to come back and clean up their mess. I also saw a lot of people asking what my parents were like when I was growing up, and if there were specific things that made me feel unwanted. Honestly, it's hard to talk about, but I think it's important to explain. They weren't outright abusive, but they never hid the fact that I was a disappointment. They wanted a girl so badly, and they made that very clear. I remember them saying things like, "We waited for our miracle baby," when talking about my sister like I was just a placeholder in the meantime. After she was born, I could have cured cancer, and they wouldn't have noticed. If I got a good grade? Didn't matter. If I hit a milestone, like a graduation or an award? Barely acknowledged. It felt like the moment she came along, they were just waiting for me to leave. And the second I turned 18, they made sure I did. I hope that clears things up. Now, here's what happened next. After reading through the comments, I decided to take some advice and reach out. A lot of people suggested that if I wanted closure, or just a better understanding of what they actually wanted from me, I should meet them somewhere neutral. So, I texted my mom and asked if they'd be willing to meet at a coffee shop in town. They agreed. I went into it with the mindset that this was just a conversation, not a commitment. I wasn't offering to help, I wasn't opening any doors. I was still angry, but I wanted to see what they had to say. When I got there, I barely recognized them. They looked exhausted, worn down in a way that made them seem so much older than I remembered. And for the first time in my life, they actually looked desperate. They didn't waste any time. The second I sat down, they started begging me for help. This time, they gave me more details than they had before. My sister's situation was even worse than I thought. Beyond the substance abuse and legal trouble, she had already cycled through multiple rehab programs, all of which my parents had paid for out of pocket. She was skipping school, sneaking out, running with a bad crowd, getting into worse and worse situations. My parents claimed they had tried everything to turn things around, but nothing had worked. And then, they hit me with something I really wasn't expecting. They had sold almost everything they owned, including my childhood home, to cover the costs. Now, they were living in a small apartment, barely scraping by. They even mentioned selling off family heirlooms to get a little more money, though they admitted it wouldn't last them much longer. They weren't just struggling. They were drowning. And despite everything, I did feel sorry for them. But at the same time, There was this unspoken expectation hanging in the air. They kept circling back to the same things: we're family, you're our son, it's your duty to help us. Not once did they acknowledge the way they had treated me. Not once did they apologize. Not once did they even act like they understood why I had no reason to care. They just assumed that no matter what happened in the past, I would step up now, because that's what family is supposed to do. And as they kept talking, I could feel all those old feelings bubbling back up. The resentment, the anger, the years of being cast aside, ignored, forgotten. They wanted my help, but they still didn't see me. Sitting there, listening to my parents talk, it hit me: they didn't think they'd done anything wrong. They brushed off the fact that they had kicked me out, acting like it was just parenting, like they had simply made the best decision for the family at the time. They spoke as if it was completely normal to treat me that way. And now, they expected me to let it all go, to act like it never happened, and jump in to fix their problems. That's when it really sank in: they weren't here to make amends. They weren't looking for forgiveness. They just needed a solution. And in their minds, I was that solution. They needed someone to take on the financial burden of the choices they had made over the years. And since they had no one else to turn to, suddenly, I mattered again. The more they talked, the angrier I got. They still didn't get it. They had pushed me away so completely that I barely even knew them anymore. They had no idea what family was supposed to mean, yet they still demanded that I treat them like family. I let them say their piece, then told them straight up I wasn't going to help. I explained that I had spent years building my life from nothing after they left me stranded, and I wasn't in a position, financially or emotionally, to take care of them now. I told them I didn't feel any obligation to bail them out of a mess they had created themselves. They lost it. They called me selfish. Told me I was abandoning my family. Accused me of being heartless for refusing to help my sister. And in that moment, looking at the anger and disappointment on their faces, it felt like I was staring at the past. Nothing had changed. They were still trying to guilt me into believing I owed them something. I walked out of that meeting feeling more conflicted than when I walked in. On one hand, I felt relieved I had set a boundary and stood up for myself. But on the other, there was this nagging guilt, like maybe I was turning my back on them at their lowest point. It's hard to explain, but even though I know they hurt me, it still feels strange to just walk away. I keep thinking about their situation. About my sister, someone I don't even know. I do feel sorry for her. But I don't feel like I can save her. The hardest part is realizing that after all these years, my parents still don't see me as an individual with my own life and struggles. To them, I'm not a person. I'm a safety net. I'm trying to let go of the guilt. But it's hard. So, I guess I'm back here to ask, did I make the right choice? Am I wrong for feeling this way? Update 2. Hey everyone, I'm back because things have gotten even more insane since my last update. And considering that was only about a week ago, I really thought things would settle down by now. But I was wrong. Just a few hours ago, my sister called me. For the first time ever. I was completely caught off guard. I barely even know her. I have these distant memories of her as a baby, right before I left home, and that's it. So when I picked up and heard her voice, I had no idea what to expect. At first, the call seemed fine. She was polite. Almost too polite, considering everything I'd heard about her behavior. I figured maybe she was reaching out to get to know me. But no. She wasn't calling to reconnect, she was calling to ask for money. And it wasn't just a casual request, either. She had clearly practiced what she was going to say. She laid it on thick, talking about how our parents were struggling, how things were so bad, and how I could be the one to save the family. I stood my ground. I told her I wasn't able to help financially and that my relationship with our parents was complicated. I kept my tone respectful and explained that I had to make decisions that were best for me. And that's when she snapped. In an instant, she went from polite to furious. She accused me of being selfish. Told me I was abandoning her, leaving her to deal with our parents alone. She said I had always been jealous of her, that I thought I was better than them just because I got away and built a life of my own. It was shocking to hear her talk like that. It sounded rehearsed. Like she had been fed those words. And the worst part? She sounded like she truly believed it. Like she genuinely thought it was my job to fix everything. I was so stunned I didn't even know how to respond. Here was this stranger, someone I had never had a relationship with, demanding that I take responsibility for years of choices I had nothing to do with. And before I could even process what had just happened, she hung up on me. After that, I had to talk to my parents. I needed to know why my sister felt this way. Why she thought I had abandoned her. Where was all this hostility coming from? So, I called them. And as soon as they answered, I asked them point blank, "What have you been telling my sister about me?" At first, they hesitated. Then, they admitted it. For years, they had been feeding her this twisted version of events. They told her that I left because I couldn't handle sharing their attention with her. They made me out to be some bitter, selfish older brother who ran away because he couldn't stand having a younger sibling. Meanwhile, the truth? They had ignored me from the moment she was born. Treated me like I was nothing. Kicked me out the second I was legally an adult. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. No wonder she felt abandoned. She had grown up believing that I left because I didn't want her around. I didn't even say anything else, I just hung up. They haven't reached out since. But then again, it's only been a few hours. And now, I don't even know how to feel. On one hand, I'm furious. Furious that my parents lied to her, that they twisted the story and made me the villain. But on the other hand, I don't know if any of this even matters anymore. Because at the end of the day, whether it's my parents or my sister, none of them ever really knew me. And I don't think they ever wanted to. Even now, I can't shake the frustration I feel toward my sister. The way she lashed out, the way she demanded my help like it was something she was entitled to, it's hard not to resent that. But at the same time, there's this guilt I can't quite explain. I keep thinking if my parents had told her the truth from the start, would things have been different between us? Maybe she wouldn't see me as some jealous, bitter brother who walked away just because I didn't want to share attention. Maybe, instead of being another person pulling me down, she could have been someone I actually wanted to help. I don't know. I can't help but wonder if I had been in her life sooner, maybe I could have reached her. Maybe I could have made a difference before things spiraled this far out of control. But now it feels like the damage is too deep. And honestly, I don't even know if I want to fix it. Just when I thought I had finally left my past behind, my family came crashing back into my life in the worst possible way. A lot of people have told me to just cut them off completely, block their numbers, and move on. And maybe that should be the answer. But for me, it's not that simple. Call me foolish, call me naive, but they're still my family. And even though I know I can't save them, I can't bring myself to look away completely. That doesn't mean I'll reach out first. It doesn't mean I'll help. Because if there's one thing I do know, it's that my parents are still manipulating the situation to get what they want. And my sister is too tangled up in their lies to see things clearly. So, for now, I have no choice but to step back. Because if I don't, I'll lose myself in their chaos all over again. Final update. It's been a few months since my last update, and I've had time to process everything. Honestly, my life has been so much better since I made the decision to stay out of my family's mess. I'm realizing now that sometimes, the only way to find peace is to walk away, to stop letting other people's disasters take up space in your life. After I last posted, I didn't hear from my parents for a while. But then, about a month later, they called me again. I almost ignored it. But curiosity got the best of me. This time, they were even more desperate than before. They used every guilt trip they could think of. They told me how bad things had gotten, how they were on the verge of losing everything, how I was the only person who could save them. At first, they tried the whole family sticks together act. When that didn't work, they threatened me, said they would make my life miserable if I refused to help. And when that didn't work, they went back to begging, saying I was their last hope. I was disgusted. Even after everything, after all the years of ignoring me, abandoning me, treating me like I was nothing, they still had the audacity to act like I owed them. Like I was nothing more than a wallet with legs. I told them, once and for all, that I wasn't going to help. I wasn't going to give them money. I wasn't going to fix their mess. I wasn't going to be manipulated into believing I had some obligation to save them. They weren't happy. For the next month, they kept calling. They tried everything: guilt, anger, false apologies. But through it all, one thing was clear. They didn't actually care about making things right. They didn't want to acknowledge how they had treated me. They just saw me as a way out of their problems. Eventually, they gave up. For a while, I thought maybe that was the end of it. But then, about a week ago, they called again. I almost didn't answer. But something in me wanted to know what had happened. And what they told me. It was worse than I expected. They had officially declared bankruptcy. They had sold almost everything they owned to cover their debts. And now, they had nothing. But the real shock came when they mentioned my sister. Apparently, she had completely cut them off and moved in with a friend. Someone who, according to my parents, enables her behavior. She's 13. Yet somehow, she's living with another family, one that, from the sound of it, doesn't care what kind of trouble she's getting into. I asked my parents why they hadn't done anything, why they didn't try to get the authorities involved. And their response? They told me it was for the best that she was gone. Because they couldn't deal with her anymore. So, after everything, after years of bending over backward for her, after treating her like the only child that ever mattered, they just gave up. They abandoned her, too. At first, they tried to blame me. They told me that if I had just helped them, none of this would have happened. That I was the reason things had fallen apart. Of course, they couldn't admit that they were the ones responsible for their own downfall. That was the final straw. I told them, point blank, that everything happening to them now was the result of their own choices. I reminded them of how they threw me out at 18. How they treated me like I was second class in my own home. How they never once cared about what happened to me after I left. And for the first time ever, they stopped arguing. They backtracked. They actually apologized. They said they regretted everything. Said they wished they had done things differently. Maybe they meant it. But honestly? It didn't matter anymore. Because an apology now doesn't change what happened then. It doesn't change the fact that they destroyed 2 lives, mine and my sister's. It doesn't erase the years of pain. They pushed me away. And now, they're finally facing the consequences. Do I feel sorry for them? Yeah. A little. But that doesn't mean I'm going to save them. I told them, once and for all, that I couldn't help. That I needed to keep my distance. They weren't happy. But I didn't budge. After I hung up, I still felt angry. But more than anything, I felt sad for them. I wish they had realized the damage they were causing when they had the chance to fix it. But now, it's too late. I've made my peace with the fact that I can't save them. And I'm learning to live with that. I don't know what will happen to them or my sister. Maybe one day, I'll try to reach out to her. Maybe I'll see if I can help her find a better path. But right now, I have my own life to focus on. I've come too far to let them pull me back into their chaos. I hope my sister figures things out before it's too late. But until then, I'm done. I don't know when or if I'll check in on them again. And I know this isn't a happy ending. But it's the ending I needed. And that's enough. Thank you to everyone who listened. Your advice and support meant more than you'll ever know.